honestly, I don't view myself as a victim of gun violence. I view myself as a victim of a maniac who happened to use a gun as a tool.
In one of the greatest testimonies before Congress, Suzanna Hupp forced everyone to face the consequences of bad gun control, delivering a speech so powerful that it left every lawmaker in the room completely speechless.
I was mad as heck at my legislators. They legislated me out of the right to protect myself and my family.
That's why today's video shouldn't be missed. Here we go.
I'd like to give particular thanks to Ms. Hupp, a constituent from the state of Texas, whose testimony I think was moving and powerful, and your personal life experience I think is very important for this debate. The importance of the right to keep and bear arms to protect ourselves and to protect our family.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. I'm speaking for myself today and not in any official capacity. I wanted to mention right off the bat that when you opened the proceedings here, you asked all of the victims of gun violence to stand, and I hesitated. But honestly, I don't view myself as a victim of gun violence. I view myself as a victim of a maniac who happened to use a gun as a tool. And I view myself as a victim of the legislators that we had at the time that left me defenseless. So that's why I hesitated.
That witness is Suzanna Hupp, a former Texas state representative and a survivor of the Luby's Cafeteria massacre, a tragedy that turned her into one of the country's most recognizable gun rights advocates throughout the 90s and the 2010s. A lot of people forget that Texas wasn't always the modern constitutional carry state that it is today. The truth is, for much of the 20th century, it had strict public carry restrictions. In other words, you could own a gun, and in some cases, you could keep one in your vehicle, but there was no standard statewide permit system for concealed carry. So that's a complete 180 from where things were just a few decades ago. One of the biggest reasons for the shift was an event that shaped Suzanna's life. So let's just hear this directly from her.
I didn't grow up in a house with guns. I'm not a hunter. But when I was 21 and I moved out on my own, I was given a gun by a friend and taught how to use it. And then I had a patient when I was in the city of Houston who was the district attorney, an assistant district attorney in Houston. And he actually convinced me to carry the gun, which at that time was illegal in the state of Texas. He said, "Susie, you don't see this stuff. I do. You need to carry your weapon and nobody's going to mess with you." Several years later, in 1991, my parents and I went to have lunch at a local cafeteria with a friend of mine that was managing the cafeteria that day. We'd finished eating when all of a sudden this guy drove a pickup truck through the floor-to-ceiling window. It came crashing in and ended up maybe 15 feet from me. Of course, we thought it was an accident. And I rose up and began to go help the people that he had knocked over. But then we heard gunshots. And my father and I immediately got down on the floor. We turned the table up in front of us. My mom got down behind us. And the shooting continued.
That attack later became known as the Luby's Cafeteria massacre, and at the time, it was described as one of the deadliest shootings in U.S. history. The shooter's motive was never fully established, but calling him unstable would probably be putting it mildly. According to an LA Times report published just a day after the tragedy, the police chief said that he had an evident problem with women for some reason, while neighbors described him as a very difficult man who had spent much of his life wandering the world as a seaman. That piece also noted that his able-bodied seaman's card was revoked by the Coast Guard after a bag of marijuana was found in his possession. So at the very least, there were serious red flags that, in hindsight, it kind of makes people now wonder how someone like that was able to legally buy firearms in the first place. But that's only part of the story, because there's another side to this whole thing that Hupp expanded on.
Now, at that time in 91, we weren't seeing these mass shootings that we're seeing now. So I was waiting for him to say something like, "All right, everybody put your wallets up on the table," or I thought maybe it was a hit. Maybe there was somebody important in there. But the shooting continued. I'm going to tell you, it took a good 45 seconds, which is an eternity, to realize that the guy was simply going to walk around, take aim, pull the trigger, go to the next person, take aim, pull the trigger. He was executing people. When I did realize it, I thought, I've got him. I've got this guy. I reached for my purse that was on the floor next to me, realized I had a perfect place to prop my arm. He was up. Everybody else in the restaurant was down. And then I realized that a few months earlier, I had made the stupidest decision of my life. I had begun leaving my gun out in my car because I did what most normal people would do. I wanted to be a law-abiding citizen. I didn't want to get caught with a gun and maybe lose my license to practice. I remember looking around and thinking, well, great, what do I do now? Throw a salt shaker at him?
That day, 23 people lost their lives, and there was many more injured. It also became the turning point that drove Suzanna to push for major changes in Texas gun laws. In 1995, the Texas legislature passed a law allowing residents with gun permits to carry concealed weapons, which was signed by George W. Bush, who was the governor back then. If anything came out of that tragedy, it was the realization that the fastest way to stop a bad person with a gun is a good person carrying one. What makes it more absurd is that laws in place at the time not only prevented Hupp from defending herself, but they also affected the police response to the situation. This is actually crazy. Check it out.
Now, to wrap the story up, the police officers, several of them were patients of mine, told me a few days later they filled in the gaps. They said that they were actually one building away in a conference. And in an odd twist of gun control fate, the hotel where they were having their conference, the manager there didn't want them to be wearing their guns and potentially offending any of her clients or customers. So she had asked them to leave their guns in their cars. So precious minutes were lost while they retrieved their guns from their locked cars. 23 people were killed that day, including my parents. It didn't occur to me at the time, but Mom wasn't going anywhere without Dad. They had just had their 47th wedding anniversary. So you may think that I was angry at the guy that did it. But the truth is, that's like being mad at a rabid dog. You don't be mad at a rabid dog. You take it behind the barn and you kill it, but you don't be mad at it. But I've got to tell you, I was mad as heck at my legislators because I honestly believe that they legislated me out of the right to protect myself and my family. And I would much rather be sitting in jail right now with a felony offense on my head and have my parents alive to know their grandchildren.
Not every moment in Congress changes how lawmakers vote or where they stand on an issue. Every now and then, one completely changes how millions of Americans look at it. And that's the category where Suzanna Hupp's testimony belongs. This hearing took place just a couple of months after the Sandy Hook shooting, when Democrats were using the tragedy to push another round of gun control measures aimed at law-abiding citizens, with the Obama administration throwing its full support behind the effort. The conversation was almost entirely one-sided, which is why Hupp's testimony stood out. She brought a perspective that forced people to think about the real-world consequences of these policies, especially in a debate that had become driven almost entirely by emotion. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, you heard it here at the Dais.